afternoon, hello. My name is Jacob Woods with the Tennessee Valley Road Museum, and welcome to the Clover Colony for our first episode of Headlight on the Collection, a new program that aims to go through the history and we hope the interesting tidbits about various pieces in our wide-ranging collection here. Now that name, Headlight on the Collection, is based upon an exhibit in our exhibit gallery about locomotives 8014 and 8021, two of our historic Second World War military locomotives, and that exhibit case quite literally has an Alco headlight which is illuminated on it, hence Headlight on the Collection. Now today, though, our headlight is on a larger piece in the collection, our historic heavyweight Pullman sleeping car, the Clover Colony. So we're standing in the body or sections of the car here, built in 1920. Out of Pullman's fleet of about 7,900 heavyweight sleeping cars, it is one of three that is in operation in regular public service and the only one that is a classic all-sleeping car heavyweight. One of the others has a lounge in it and a buffet or kitchen, and the other one has an observation as well as the buffet and kitchen in it. So this is the only one, really, that is intact, unaltered, since the days of Pullman and still operating for the general public. So we're stood here next to a section set up for daytime accommodation. The section was Pullman's most basic form of travel and really the only one they offered from the company's inception during the middle of the 19th century up until the early 20th century. Now this car, though, is not all sections. Behind me are some of the double bedrooms. When this car was built, it was sections, and there would have been sections behind me all the way down here, just like these here. However, beginning in the late 1920s, we began experimenting with two things, one of them being air conditioning, the other one being private bedrooms, which a lot of cars had a single drawing room or a couple compartments in them. But really in the mid-1930s, Pullman began a plan of rebuilding a number of old all-section heavyweights, including one of them named the BERNADOTTE, this one built in 1920, to add bedrooms. And one of those series that they began in the mid-1930s was the Clover series. They would take four of these sections out, as well as one of the vestibules, the stairs on the end of it, and they would replace them with 5 double bedrooms. Now the early cars that they started with looked more Edwardian inside, had a two-tone interior, large brass lights, and pen lining. This, however, was the second to the last Clover Series car rebuilt, and they rebuilt over 100 of them, and this one rolled out in August of 1940 there, just before the start of the Second World War. And it saw service for a number of years on the Southern Pacific on a train known as the Lark. After that, it began a career in private ownership, and this year we celebrate 30 years that it's been here at the museum. In 1994 it came here. So come with us as we show you through the car and tell you how it came to be here at the museum. So follow me, and we hope you enjoy this tour. Thank you. We're sat here in section number 1 in the Clover Colony in our daytime configuration. We've got our window shades about 12 inches from the top of the window opening there. Pullman was incredibly fastidious about everything, with rules, as we'll see later, on how to linen and make a bed, how to serve a beverage, and that depended on what beverage was being served, and of course how to locate the window shades. So daytime section provided a first-class accommodation there. Pullman did also operate first-class parlor cars, lounge, and restaurant cars, but sleeping cars were the majority of the fleet, and there were many times when passengers would sit in the sections during the day as well. Now, I should mention, on some parlor car lines, if they did not have a designated parlor car that had the swivel chairs in it or some type of movable lounge furniture, which would be a lounge car at that point, they would use sleeping cars. We have seen documentation of sleeping cars being used to back up or to fulfill parlor car lines. It seems especially prevalent here in the South. The Pennsylvania Railroad and the New Haven had large fleets of Pullman parlor cars, but down here in the South there does not seem to have been quite that plentiful collection of parlor and lounge cars, which are two different types of cars, I shall clarify. But of course by night this all turns into beds, as we'll show you later, but during the day you've got your two overstuffed sofas here, you've got your porter's call bell, so the porter there is only ever a ring away, you've got your air conditioning. Again, these cars did not originally have air conditioning, hence the brass fans, and they originally had sash vents here so you could get outside airflow inside, but they began rebuilding them in the 1930s, in this case with mechanical air conditioning in this car. Some of them had brine air conditioning, others of them had electromechanical. critically, mechanical air conditioning would not blow if the wheels did not turn. So when the car was rolling, you would have air conditioning. When it was stationary at a stop or at a signal, you would have no air conditioning. Now, they had a standby plug-in for a long-term layover, but if it was just stopped waiting for a signal or stopped discharging passengers at a small town, there would be no air conditioning. To compensate for that, they had a brine tank. There was a separate set of coils up here on the clerestory roof and its own pump, which had a much smaller motor and therefore the batteries could sustain, and there was a large 90-gallon tank beneath the car, and it would circulate that chilled brine. Eventually, batteries got better, that system was bypassed and removed altogether in the early 1950s. It is our intent at this point to recreate that system, at least cosmetically, in a future restoration project of a different Pullman, which I'm sure one day we will talk about in one of our videos there. But that all was added in a modernization in this car. Other modernizations included the streamlined berth lights here. The original little bakelite shades were replaced with these ones. In the early Clover series cars kept those. Some of the very early Clover series still had the varnished wood paneled interior inside. Again, when these cars were new, when this was the BERNADOTTE, it had an all-wooden interior. As you see it today is solidly the Clover Colony of the post-war period. The early Clovers retained the wood and then later went to maybe a two-tone cream and beige or tan. This car, when it was first rebuilt, was painted what was known as Desert Rose, or R17, a sort of peachy pink color, not to be confused with Old Rose, or R10, the very pink color that a lot of parlor and lounge cars were painted, cars such as the Dover series vehicles. We still have our mirror here. Now, I should mention, we'll get a little off track, but these were originally painted. This was a change made during the car's third era of private ownership. The wooden mirrors here, which are very elegant and certainly portray this car's history as the only Amtrak certified Pullman, which it really held that role for a number of years in the 1970s and 1980s until the Dover Harbor came online and the Kitchigami Club was rescued from maintenance of way service. So now that we've seen a section in the daytime, we'll come down here and show you how it transitions into a bed at nighttime. Now, those of us who are riding in reverse, which I would be the way the car is set up, would have the upper berth. So the less expensive upper berth accommodation at night would also be the one to ride backwards during the day. So he who got to ride forwards would get to sleep in the lower berth at night, and he, or I suppose she, who would ride backwards would get the upper berth at night. So speaking of upper and lower berths, let's show you how a section turns into a nighttime accommodation. We're once again here in the sections or body of the Clover Colony, showing how the daytime sections would be transitioned into beds at nighttime. That was traditionally done by the Pullman Porter, who was generally a black individual who was employed by the Pullman Company. That's something very important that I feel like a lot of people don't understand, is that these cars were built, owned, and operated by the Pullman Company. So the Pullman Porter, the Pullman Conductor, Pullman attendant, they all were employed by the Pullman Company. Everything here was property of the Pullman Company, hence why the linens and towels were so marked. When you left the railroad-operated dining car or coach, whatever vehicle was ahead of this, and stepped across that threshold, you left, in this case, Southern Railway property and stepped onto Pullman Company property. You were in the domain of Pullman. So these Pullman porters were very skilled men who were at every passenger's beck and call to provide the first-class service that the Pullman Company was known for, and they worked directly for Pullman. Now, these gentlemen are said to be able to make down a berth in 90 seconds. Now, I guarantee you, if I worked for the Pullman Company, I would have been fired on the first day. Certainly cannot make it down in 90 seconds, but these gentlemen were reputed for their fine service and quality accommodations that they could provide. It's on page 1 of one of the Pullman Company's many guidebooks that it is Pullman service that the company is known for. And as they proved in later years after the federal antitrust lawsuit, they could operate a Budd or American Car and Foundry built vehicle. And it was their manpower that made the Pullman Company synonymous with first-class rail travel. Of course, having a proper Pullman-built vehicle helped a great way, and the lack of that in later years is one of a number of factors that led to the downfall of the Pullman Company, coupled with a variety of other factors. Be happy to talk about later. But we're here next to section number 3, which we'll be setting up as a double occupancy section here in the role of the Pullman Porter. Now, I should mention, for a number of years it became common to simply refer to the Pullman Porter as George, after George Pullman, a derogatory term saying that he had no name of his own, or it wasn't worth learning. He was just part of George Pullman's company. And that was quite derogatory, and there eventually became a group, the Society for the Prevention of Calling Sleeping Car Porters George, that included a variety of members, including His Majesty King George V, as well as George Herman Babe Ruth. And eventually it became Pullman policy that unless a porter's name was in fact George, he did not have to answer to George if a passenger referred to him as such. So we'll be showing that role, though, that the Pullman Porter was so well known for as we turn this berth from daytime accommodation into a double occupancy nighttime section. Again, the person who would be riding in reverse would get the upper berth. Now, in later years, Pullman did offer a single occupancy section. They began advertising that, I'm saying, the mid-1930s, early 1930s, somewhere around there, where you could have twice as many pillows, double mattress, more room, but it was standard to have a double occupancy section for two. Now, I should mention, during the Second World War with the Maine's troop trains, they were putting three in a section, two in the lower and one in the upper, as Pullmans were the backbone of troop transport up until really early in the Korean era, and there were a number of Pullmans that were kept around just in strategic reserve into that. A number of older cars, maybe ones that didn't have air conditioning, or ones that still had all 12 of their sections, or 14 sections that had never had bedrooms added. So come along with us as we step from daytime to nighttime. We're here in the sections or body of the Clover Colony, section number 3, where we'll be transitioning it from daytime operation to nighttime operation. We've got our window shades drawn here to try to replicate nighttime. It is still daylight outside. There are only a few times a year when the Clover Colony is out operating after dark. On our holiday trips, some of our dinner trains later in the year when it gets dark early, it is possible to ride it after dark. Still set up for daytime operation, though. However, at our annual Railroad Summer Camp, our 13 to 17-year-old overnight camp, and our Rising Railroad Professionals program, the participants do traditionally get to spend the night in this car set up for nighttime operation. Now, I'll let you know, I'm 6'2", and these beds are too short for me. So they were fine for Pullman's travelers of the 20th century, but for those of you who are tall like me, they are a mite too short. We've not changed anything in this car. It's how it was. So the beds naturally are still set up for the 20th century traveler. So we'll begin sliding our lower section cushions together. This end, since it is facing the locomotive, will be the head end of our bed. Of course, who would ride backwards in this seat will get the upper berth. So we'll begin with sliding our lower cushions together. And we will then lift our headrest at the foot end to make a shelf, and we will lift our headrest at the head end to be a headboard. Now, one thing to note here is when working on a car, it is important to understand how things operate. At some point, when the car was reupholstered and rebuilt, the original little cords on the end were replaced, and the person who replaced the cord did not realize that they were supposed to go above these hooks. So the original cord is no longer long enough to go around the base of the light fixture as was intended. So we have our longer cord here. Again, I will remind you that we are 104 years into our 20-year intended life expectancy, and we naturally do not want to force anything. We want to be gentle. So sometimes it does take a little longer, but that's the price to pay for being gentle with everything. Leave that in condition there. Again, if we had our proper cord on it, it would hold taut as was intended. So now that we've got our lower berth down, we will pull our mattress extender out. Pullman provided these extenders for their steel coaches, and it's listed on how to position this. In the Pullman manual, the instructions to porters, I've got here some printouts. It's raining today, so I haven't brought out an original, but there are over 10 pages simply on how to make a bed. It covers things from how to fold the linens, how to pull the mattress out of the upper berth, which we'll be doing momentarily. Now, originally when the porter would have done that, they would have had an elastic strap to hold down the upper berth, as it is spring-loaded with a tension spring, but naturally anything elasticized that is that old is no longer operative. So we'll be bringing in someone to assist for safety, as it's right there in the Pullman name, to travel and sleep in safety and comfort. Well, now that we have our lower berth down, we'll begin lowering our upper berth. Now again, as I mentioned, they would have used an elastic strap, but anything that old naturally is not to be depended on. So in the interest of safety, we are traveling and sleeping in Pullman safety and comfort, we'll have Mr. Charles Gooch here from our education department to assist in the lowering of this berth, along with our trusty Pullman ladder here. And we also have our Pullman berth key here. This is one of the larger examples that we kept in the linen locker or carried by inspectors and other officials. The Pullman Porter would traditionally have a smaller example that looked just like this, without the large handle on the end that could be carried in his pocket. We have our end on it so we can unlock our upper berth. we can lock and unlock our bulkheads here. There's a latch on the end of the vestibule door that this fits, and then on this end we have our steam heat and water valve connection here for controlling various different valves in the car. We'll begin lowering berth number 3 now. Again, a berth that is 104 years beyond the day it left the factory. 104 years into an intended 20-year lifespan. Got our built-in hangers here. They are original to the car. Now we will begin by folding our mattress here. This is a lower berth mattress. Again, the lower berths had no box spring built in, so they have a thicker, larger mattress. We have our upper berth mattress here covered with a modern cover, but here we've got our original Pullman one. So we'll begin by folding it in half, as Pullman recommends in their over 10 pages of instructions on how to lower a berth. This fits in up against our extender quite well. And then now that we have this lowered, we'll begin with putting our curtains in here. In the bedrooms you had safety netting. In this case we have our large heavy curtains that serve as your source of privacy. We'll fit our ladder after we've linened the bed. We'll get our pillows out, and we'll have a first-class nighttime accommodation. Again, this was how over 100,000 people a night traveled at Pullman's Peak in 1930. Well, our lower berth has magically linened itself. I again must say how much admiration and respect I have for the Pullman Porters. It is a very difficult space to work in. You've got low headroom, lots of confined areas to reach into. You've got numerous pleats and several folds. So I do hope I've gotten it close enough to what would be acceptable to the Pullman Company. Again, I know I would never meet their standards, but we want to try to show how they would have done it in their exacting standards that we're so revered. So we have our bottom sheet and our top sheet. The bottom sheet is the only modern or reproduction piece of equipment that's been used here in this whole display. The blanket, the top sheet, the pillows, the pillow slips, they're original. The table linens that you'll see later, the napkins, anything there is original. Naturally, on a lot of operating days we're not able to do this, but from a museum display perspective, when the car is being displayed, we do have original accoutrements to go with it. So we'll finish up our lower berth here. We will get our pillows ready. We'll have 2 of them, as this is double occupancy. The instructions mark on how to strike a pillow with one's open hand, and then to force it into the 4 corners of the pillow slip, stating that it should never be held under one's chin or in one's teeth. I see the sanitary concern with that. So we have 1 pillow here with our Pullman mark slip, of course. Again, our headrest should be all the way up if it had its correct cabling on it. And we'll get our 2nd pillow slip here, and our pillow inside of it as well. And there we go. We have our 2 pillows here. And we have our net against the back wall here as well, you'll see here, for our personal accoutrements. So your personal belongings and items there could either be stowed beneath the section here. We have our hangers that fold out for your clothing items here. And other items would go in the net there. Now there is a type of suitcase known as a Pullman suitcase. Its size originates from being the perfect size to slide beneath a Pullman section here. So now that we have our lower berth together, we'll start in on our upper berth. And we've already got our fitted sheet of modern concession here. Now speaking of which, as we look up to our upper berth here, you will see we have our original light fixtures in here. When Pullman modernized the car and replaced the original lights down below, we still have our old style recessed brass lights in the L170s series. There you've got your 173s, your 177s that curve to the ceiling of the car there. So we'll get our trusty ladder here. We have 2 ladders, one for passengers, one for crew-on. So we'll step up here. We've got our linens ready here. Again, we'll be failing that Pullman Company inspection right there. The Pullman inspector will be down here to catch me in a moment, and you'll have the superintendent down here to can me momentarily. So we do hope you're enjoying the tour so far. It's marked that when I'm handling the front of beds, I should be using a glove or cloth to avoid getting fingerprints on things. So you'd be in trouble for violating that as well. That 90-second timer is still running there, of course, that the very adept Pullman porters would be moving against to provide their timely and efficient service. Tuck this in, and we want to have our 4-inch pleat here at the bottom, as according to the Pullman manual. There'll be a 4-inch pleat at the bottom and a 6-inch pleat at the top, in both the blanket as well as the secondary sheet here, which I'm currently putting atop the bed right now. Might be slightly on the small side, maybe 3.5 inches, but for our purposes here, we will call that 4 inches there. Keep that clear of that binding chain there, so we don't get any grease on our bed linens. Move our ladder back down here. I'm sure the porter was able to do it without moving the ladder. We'll then fold this down in a triangular manner from about the top of the bed. Leave this sheet slightly loose. We'll then go get our classic brown blanket. We've got 2 styles of blanket, the more modern cedar era blanket with the round Pullman logo that would have been seen in the post-war period, and in this case we're using the older, more classic blankets, which again, for the modernized appearance of this car as you see it in post-war, is questionable, but again, this car was in service in the era when heavyweight blankets were used. So we'll make a quick cut and see you momentarily. Thank you. Now that we have our original Pullman blanket here, of course marked with the Pullman company name in the center, it was Pullman practice to make sure that the bed linens and the blankets, as well as the towels and other linens, had the Pullman company markings visible. So we have our classic blanket here. It is an S series. Take your number there and find out what year a blanket was manufactured. Now when these blankets grew old and ratty, they would be dyed blue and become the porter's blanket. In a car where there was no washroom with its own smoking room sofa in it, the Clover Colony is one of those, the original sofa having been removed post-Pullman, right after it left Pullman service in 1964, the porter would be allowed to sleep in the upper berth closest to the washroom, provided there was not someone else occupying under it, and one of the dyed blue blankets would be used, just as a side note there. So this one, of course, is for passenger use, so it's still in its original color scheme. I do wonder how many seconds into that 90-second time we are so far. So we'll now fold this back with a single triangular fold. We will then get our linen out, fold that over top of it, and then just as we have done with the lower berth, we will now fold that back atop itself once, and then fold the edge down in hopes of being nice and inviting there for the passenger who will be spending the night here in the upper berth. Now I will say I have taken the opportunity to ride some of our trips in an upper berth on private deadhead moves, just so I can get an idea of what the experience is like. For those of you who have the luxury of being near somewhere that has a Pullman car, from a historical perspective, I would highly recommend it. That chance to experience history firsthand, what it was like to ride in an upper berth. I believe Via Rail still has some of the Manor series sleeping cars in operation that were built by the Budd Company that feature section space. Now we have finished making our upper berth. We have our 4 or so inch pleat there at the bottom as per Pullman practice. We'll get our 2 pillows up here, then we will add our passenger's ladder and hang our privacy curtains there. So we have our pillows here, move these into the upper berth, and we'll have the same position here facing the head end of the locomotive. In this case, the locomotive is on the end of the train behind me. This actually is the first car behind the locomotive in this consist. Again, we have another one of our little nets up here for passenger items. And we have our original little light fixtures up here to provide your safety and comfort. Got a porter's call bell up here, our air conditioning ductwork, and your section number here, these original little shields. They are said to have come from the parts bin at the Sunnyside Coach Yard on the Pennsylvania Railroad. So a little interesting tidbit right there. And another thing to note, we're in berth number 3 here. This car is said to have been used in the filming of Some Like It Hot in Pullman service in 1959. At that point, it was operating on the Southern Pacific under the care of the Pullman Company. However, at that time, it was owned by the Southern Pacific. As part of that antitrust lawsuit, Pullman was forced to either choose between manufacturing cars or operating them. So there was the Pullman divestiture, where the Pullman Company, the operating side, was split up to a consortium of the railroads over which they operated. And a number of the cars, based on how many they used, were transferred to those railroads, who then leased them back to the Pullman Company. There were some cars, especially lounge cars or section lounge observations, restaurant cars, that were retained outright by the Pullman Company. But operations-wise, they were still operated by the Pullman Company. But during that time, the car was said to have been used along with the Lake Mary in the filming of Some Like It Hot. And there's various different people, depending on which experts you ask from the era, they'll say whether things were used or not. There certainly was a sound stage used that had a faux wood-grained interior, but there are some that say that the Clover Colony was used in that and that it was Section 3 nonetheless. So turn to your local Pullmanite, your Pullman expert there. Well, I suppose that would be the second generation of Pullman experts. All the great Pullman experts of the days when Pullman was in operation have sadly passed on. But turn to your local Pullmanite and take their take on the story as to if this car was used for internal filming or just exterior, and which section was used in that. So back on track here, we have our upper berth turned down, so we're now going to fetch our heavy curtains. A little tidbit, if you ever want to choke a washing machine, I don't know what it would do with the curtains, but put one of these in there and I'm sure you'll have that washing machine on its knees begging for mercy. There were several different types of curtains. You had the old style, the Grant curtains. It depended on the type of car. Now, a keen eye will notice that these are marked number 11. Well, this car only has 8 sections. These curtains are from our other Pullman, the Maitland, the car I mentioned earlier with the intent to replicate the brine tank for. The Maitland has 12 sections and is currently under restoration as part of the Save America's Treasures program. So, hence why we have curtains that have a number higher than 8 on them. We have a very large number of mattresses as well from the number of Pullmans in our collection here at the museum. I do believe I'm hanging this curtain right side up. That's good. Again, Pullman Company would have been after me long ago. Loops here. And we'll step down here. We have our ladder here. Now, an interesting fact about the ladder specifically is the carpeting on top of them. The carpet on the ladders came from old carpeting that was ripped up as scraps. For instance, this is a vine pattern of carpeting that was popular in cars when they were delivered. Some of the Plan 3521 cars, the observation cars, the ones you would have seen on maybe the Capital Limited or the National Limited, had a carpeting like this. Specifically, the 3521 cars used on the Southern had a different diamond pattern of carpeting, which we have another one of these ladders that has that pattern of carpeting on it. But a number of the box springs in here have little runners made out of this carpeting, as do the ladders. And speaking of the box springs, some of them are from the Clover Blossom. The Clover Blossom is another one of these Clover series cars, one of 4 that survives. It spent many years in Southern Pacific Maintenance of Way and later in Union Pacific Maintenance of Way service, and is now preserved in unrestored condition on the West Coast. Now, I've never been inside to see whether or not it has bits from another Clover series car or if it's simply missing these bits. But we have our own box spring here in the top, which are cushioned with the same style of carpeting as the ladder is. So we will attach our ladder here. We'll put it at the foot of the bed down here. Again, our head end is at the other end. It attaches over top our runner here. And we have a nice secure ladder. You were supposed to ring the porter for the ladder and never to jump down out of a berth. Of course, in this era, there are no toilets here. The toilets are in the end of the car, so if you needed the toilet in the middle of the night, you were going to have to ring for the porter, who, of course, was not getting much sleep, was working very long hours. The Pullman Porter was considered a good job at that time. It paid well, but the hours were very long, and I would expect things were probably quite hard. I certainly would be very tired of it, making down 2 berths, and I've still got 6 more to go, 6 more sections, no less. Not counting, if we had all of them set, there would be 7 sections. We have one of them again for the display set up for daytime accommodation. Now that we have our ladder in place here, we will fold up our other ladder here, which again you'll see has yet a different pattern of carpeting on it, one of the more modern patterns of the lightweight era. Again, this is a typical heavyweight car. Let's not trip over things here. Meaning it's built of heavy riveted steel. It weighs probably 90-95 tons. And was a more opulent car. As modernism came about, you start to see the heavyweight car not only go away mechanically, but also in terms of decor. The old wooden mirrors would go away. Again, as I mentioned, they replaced the original berth fixtures that you see in the upper berth, with the more modern ones down low, and even the carpet pattern would be simplified to one such as this, or the common what's known as C&O pattern that we use in the Clover Colony, the geometric squares. So now that we have our berth ready, we're ready to travel, and in this case, sleep in safety and comfort. Welcome aboard. Well, I've had a good night's rest, one of the 100,000 travelers who've just spent the night on Pullmans all across the country. And I think now that I've woken up, I'm ready for breakfast. But I don't want to have breakfast in the dining car. I've paid extra to travel first class in Pullman. So I'm going to partake in what was known as upstairs service, and I'd like to have my meal here in the sections. The Pullman Company traditionally carried 3, I guess sometimes 4 tables per car that be kept in the linen locker down at the end of the car. And for those wanting to pay extra and tip their porter, they could have their meal served right here in the sections. So now that I've woken up, it's time for breakfast. Here we go. And just like that, here we are at breakfast. I suppose the porter probably wishes it was that easy to get the upper berth and the lower berth turned back for daytime accommodation. So we're here at our upstairs service, so to speak, having our meal on board the Clover Colony rather than journeying back to the dining car. So we have our Pullman menus here. These are reproductions. We have a sort of lightweight era, or the Mr. P era, with the conductor holding his little hat. However, when you open it up, you don't see Pullman's signature meals. You find out about the history of the Clover Colony and one of our other rail cars nonetheless. We have our little reproduction menu here, and we also have our Pullman service menu here. This one's from a friend's collection that's been reproduced, and once again on the back you have the history of the Clover Colony, and we've had this one laminated here for longevity. The Pullman Company, of course, had their own dining cars. Pullman pioneered the dining car with the first one in 1868, named the Delmonico, after a fine New York restaurant, and operated a fleet of hotel cars that had both sleeping and dining capabilities. However, towards the end of the 19th century, they began moving away from dining car operation. There was a brief return to dining car operation in the 1920s with the Pullman pool diners. A number of those later went to, I believe, the Atlantic Coastline and the Erie Railroad, later becoming the Erie-Lackawanna 740 series. And one of those was used on the Cardinals train, interestingly enough. However, they went away from all of that. But with the coming of the Great Depression, the railroads could not really afford to justify operating dining cars. Dining cars were, by many, long considered to be a necessary evil that didn't really make money and were a lot of hassle. But with the Depression, it just got even worse. So Pullman took a number of old sleeping cars and would rebuild them into maybe restaurant lounge cars, restaurant parlor, 8-section restaurant lounge, or 8-section buffet lounge. And they had their own menu on board where they used their own china. They used the Indian tree china. That was a commercially available pattern. The personally available pattern featured a pink blossom. The restaurant wear version of it featured the orange blossom here, and all they did at Pullman was add the crest to the top of it. Now, later on, a couple other changes were made. The crest was taken off to save money. It was then put back on, and the center tree was taken off, and I think it was something like 7 cents. It could have been 5 cents. I apologize, I'm not brushed up exactly on the dollars and cents there. But when you consider how many pieces of china Pullman ordered, having one less tree that would save a nickel, say, on each piece was a considerable amount of money that added up to. So they had their own pattern of Indian tree china and their own Roosevelt pattern silver flatware on board. So we're here ready to have our breakfast now. I think we'll start off with our coffee here with our Hall Verde green coffee pot here. We'll have our beverage today. Oh dear, I do suppose someone hasn't put the coffee grounds in, because that looks quite white and clear there. That never would have done on Pullman, I suppose. But we do have our original pattern flatware and our original pattern china here. Again, naturally on modern operations we're not always able to get this out. Same for the original Pullman table linens. We do, however, have our replica Pullman paperwork, which is capable of being used on board. It works just the same as modern paper. Our dinner check or our meal check here, as well as our drink order form. And you too can get this experience by choosing to ride on this very car on our award-winning dinner train. It runs most Friday and Saturday nights in season, some Thursday nights as well, including wine train editions, various different holiday and seasonal departures. But you too can ride and dine aboard this Pullman car, where we now have more than 3 of those original tables. Now I should make the mention Pullman car. Pullman became synonymous with this type of car, but historically it was a Pullman company sleeping car. They would have told you there was no such thing as a Pullman car, other than it was a car owned by Pullman. But in that endearing legacy there, the name Pullman car that just flows off the tongue when you see one of these old cars rolling down the track has entered the railroad parlance. There's no such thing as an Amtrak car, but there is a Pullman car. You can take a Pullman, but you can't take an Amtrak. Well, now that we've covered our drinks and I've had a delightful cup of oddly light in color coffee here, we can talk about the meals that were offered. Again, Pullman had their own menus. Some of that was dictated by what type of accommodation the car had. If it only had a buffet, it might not be able to prepare as much food as a full restaurant car, or some cars were set up only for sandwich service. But I've got my tab plate, as it was known, here with the divider. Those are one of the peak Pullman collector's items. I believe only 1,000 of them were ever made. And I've got a friend who owns, I think, 5 of them. So the tab plates are a collector's choice item, I suppose. But they were used for your cold plates, your hot plates, I suppose, and your sampler here. So we had our Rising Railroad Professionals program here last year. We actually used these 2 very dishes, oddly enough. I think, at least I know it was this piece, and I believe we used this one. And we had some of Pullman's most revered menu in the later years item, the double lamb chop there. It was served with watercress, a sort of leafy green substance, for those of you who may not be familiar with that. It had a side of hashed brown potatoes that one could order with such in a combination plate, and from the original Pullman recipe, canned new peas, no less. So it was quite an unforgettable experience to have on board a real car, to have on original china and have their original meal. That was the #1, I guess you would say, ranked meal in the later years, was the double lamb chop. They had mutton earlier on, and a number of other meals. Again, these were fine meals, nothing like automat car or anything. And as time went on, though, the double lamb chop really became the most common meal in later years. There were breakfast foods as well. One of my favorites to partake in is the ham and eggs. Oh my, I must tell you, we have a lovely chef out here, and I think he about fed us to death on that ham there. Pullman called for 2 slices of ham, and he was giving us 2 slabs of ham at a time. But the ham and eggs there was a lovely meal to have. Again, that could be ordered with the hashed brown potatoes as a hot plate on your warmed china there. So now that we've discussed our food, again, I do regret that it's not real common to have that anymore in the modern era, but it is a lovely chance when we do have a special occasion to be able to make the original recipe and serve it on board an original car and have it on original china. So we hope we'll see you out here, though, for some of these occasions, whether it's with original menus or with our award-winning dinner trains menus. So thank you very much. There we go. Now that I've got breakfast over, I've washed up and done cleaning my teeth here, I've used the dental bowl here with a dental basin that was fitted to Pullman's solely for the cleaning of teeth. Now, of course, during the Great War, the USRA, United States Railroad Administration, was established, and there were numerous recommendations that they made, and, well, some weren't recommendations when you've got a government agency. And one of the things that resulted was Pullman implementing these dental bowls in here. As otherwise, you would have had to use the lav here. This is not a sink. It's essentially a pitcher and basin that's plumbed up. So you put the drain plug in, and then it simply fills from the bottom up to the top. It does not come out. So you fill it up and then splash your hands around inside of it. That way. So if you're trying to use a toothbrush there, you'd have to dunk that in there, and that's a major hygienic issue. So the dental bowls were fitted, and they have their own little tap here that works from a pedal here on the floor. Now, specifically, we are here in the women's end of the washroom, which directly ahead of me here is the hair table here. So you could have your hair cut here, and we've got one of the original rotating chairs here. Now I should mention many people are familiar with the Pullman Porter, but not nearly as many are familiar with the Pullman Maid. The Pullman Maid was an early cut, shall we say, when the goings got tougher and finances got more tight. The Pullman Maids were let go. But think of a female version of the Pullman Porter, whereas the porter would shine a gentleman's shoes at night, clean the lint off his suit, and do all manner of other things that a fine gentleman's valet would. A Pullman Maid was designed to handle nail products, hair, and help a woman make her toilet in the morning, so to speak. So we have our original chair here. There usually would be 2 or 3 of these, and we have our hair receptacle here on the original wooden table here. Again, you'll notice in here some of the original fixtures remain inside. They were not modernized in here, the original tulip globe fixtures. And we also have some of our towels in here that also have the Pullman Company branding, as I mentioned, on them, and that's going to be kept visible. Our porter's call bell again in here. It's only ever a ring away. Even from the toilet saloon, as it was known itself, when sat on the hopper, one could ring for the Pullman Porter. So the porter was only ever a push of a button away. So now that we've made our toilet, we'll head back out and see the remainder of the car. We do hope you're enjoying this tour so far. Oh, well, hello there. We're standing in double bedroom A here. This is one of the 5 double bedrooms that was added in that 1940 shopping there. Now the early Clovers featured all 5 of the bedrooms on one end. This is one of the later ones, as I mentioned, so it has 3 of them on one end and 2 of them on the other end. So as we come inside here, we'll see we have our own personal hopper in here now, as well as our own washstand. It folds down from the wall there. You've got your own little soap area in there and your own little teeth cleaning area. We have our own mirror and washstand here with original streamlined Art Deco fixtures. We have our little writing desk or tea table here. Folds up. And our beds fold down from the wall here. Now these beds run longitudinally, so they are slightly longer than the beds in the sections, but they're also slightly narrower. Again, we have our upper berth up top, and we have our lower berth here. Now we've got our own little ashtray here, and importantly, for those of you who maybe get hot or cold easily, we have our own temperature control in here for the steam heat valve, and we also have our own air conditioning control right here, as air conditioning was, by the time this car was rebuilt with bedrooms, was in place. Again, originally you did not have air conditioning, so the cars were fitted with fans. Even though the car is air conditioned these days, the original brass fans are still on the wall, which we'll be sure to take a look at momentarily. They're deal fans, and the ones in the bedrooms have 3 speeds, whilst the larger one in the sections has 1 speed. Hey, you may be wondering, well, what's this over here? Well, this is an adjoining bedroom. 4 out of the 5 bedrooms are adjoining. So we have the door that opens here, and our entire wall lifts up and slides back out of the way. So if you were traveling in a pair, maybe taking the children out with mother and father, you could take out the second bedroom next to you and have twice as much space here. So open up the wall again, you've got your own hopper over here. Yet another bed. We have the upper berth here turned down with the bedroom style safety netting in here that latches into place. You had a narrower ladder that went in here than the one outside that was larger. And once again, you had your lower berth that would fold down out of the wall for nighttime accommodation. And in this case, we have a piece of lint on our bed. I'm sure that would never fly in Pullman inspection regulations. Again, we've got our own ashtray here in the bed. I wouldn't want to smoke in bed though. That could be a fire hazard right there. And we have our little streamlined berth lights down below, whilst up top we still have our original berth. So this was essentially deluxe first class travel. The entire Pullman was first class travel, but then beyond that you had your single and double bedrooms. Larger than that you had a compartment, and above that you had a drawing room which had its own section, its own sofa, and its own separate toilet annex. Not just a hopper in the corner, but its own separate room. And later on, in what was known as the lightweight era, they added something known as the master bedroom. For instance, some of you who know trains in the South, you may be familiar with the Crescent series of cars. The Crescent Harbor, Crescent Moon, those featured a master bedroom which had their own set of green towels rather than the blue and white. They were green and white and had their own shower on board. There were less than 10 master rooms in Pullmans in the region. But now that we've seen our washrooms, we've seen our double bedrooms, and we've taken you on what I hope is a pretty intensive and thorough tour of the inside of the car, we'll step out and see the exterior of the car, see what shows the Pullman name to the world as this train rolls down the track. Well, here we are outside the Clover Colony on the blind end. As I mentioned, when this car was rebuilt from the BERNADOTTE into the Clover Colony, to make room for 5 double bedrooms, they also sealed up the vestibule here. You see there's no door and there are no stairs here. There's simply a blind end. So we're here on the blind end of that car, right underneath the Pullman lettering. Now, when these heavyweights were in their heyday of operation, built, owned, and operated by Pullman, they carried Pullman standard color, or Pullman green. There was actually no green in it. And with the large Pullman in the center, usually about 7-inch figures. However, as time went on with the divestiture, you began to see Pullman relegated to the ends with the owning railroad's name in the center. There were a few cases early on name trains, maybe the Overland, where you would have that in the middle and Pullman already on the end. But as time went on, you start to see this move to the end. So the car is restored to a sort of pseudo Tennessee Valley 1950s appearance. Had Tennessee Valley Railroad been operating in that point, it would have likely carried some type of lettering like this. So we're outside the car though, saying that this again carried Pullman's name. Everything when this car left Pullman service would have to have the Pullman name removed. That water pitcher inside, the coffee pot, the linens, it all would have to be struck through, and the name would have to be painted out on the outside yet as well. Speaking of when this car left Pullman service, it was retired in 1961 and sold to Midwest Steel, and it came here to near Birmingham, Alabama, and was going to be cut up for scrap. Happily though, a gentleman named Mr. Jack Ferris was starting a private rail cars venture. He'd acquired a car named the Capitol Heights, and this was his second car that he acquired. They added a shower inside, repainted the exterior in a deep blue livery with gold stripe and lettering, and it became the second car in the eventual 10-car private rail cars fleet. This was still the 1960s though, so it still ran with steam heat. The electric was generated off the turning wheels. It had what were known as plain bearings on it, so you had to put oil in the bearings. As time went on though, that became an issue. They sold the car to the High Iron Company, who shed the blue for High Iron Maroon, very similar to this with a single yellow stripe, and it was pulled behind the Southern Pacific 4449. I know for certain, I assume the other High Iron Company locomotives, the 2101, the 759, and other vehicles, until they sold the car to a duopoly of owners, Mr. Larry Haynes and Rudy Morgenthau. And now under their ownership, there began to be some problems arising with the car's original condition. Amtrak would not run the car with the original plain bearings or with the original Pullman coupling. So at one point they were actually using Penn Central and the Southern Railway to take the car. So this car was used on Penn Central's RPO. Mr. George Penn's actually has recently written an article, I believe in the Pennsylvania Railroad Technical and Historical Society Journal, about the use of this car on, I guess, PC3, the last RPO, because Amtrak would not touch it. So finally, over the winter of 1974 to 75, it was taken to Point St. Charles in Canada, and they put the old-style Timken roller bearings on it. The old cast-iron brake shoes were replaced with high-friction composite shoes. The original 18-inch brake cylinder was replaced with a 14-inch cylinder, and that made the car Amtrackable. It continued then to travel all over. The car was then again sold in 1986 to another private owner who took it on, so pretty much a nationwide tour. There were again getting to be more issues. At that point you had to have more modern bearings, so these were changed out for a set of modern bearings. A larger water tank was put on it, and critically the original axle-driven generator had to be disconnected and replaced with a large diesel generator and a modern air conditioning system. It seemed that the car was going to have a happy life on Amtrak until Mother Nature intervened. It was in Florida in 1992 when Hurricane Andrew hit. That brought the building this car was in down on top of it. The car was thought to really only be fitting for scrap by some at that point. Happily though, Mr. Pete Clausen was able to acquire the car. There was another car there, the Hampton Roads, an office car that we were initially going to acquire. A trade was arranged, and the Clover Colony has been here ever since. Now, when it left Amtrak service, there was no need for all that Amtrak equipment, so the car was restored. The old trucks with the Timkens went back on it, the HEP equipment came off of it, and the modern diaphragms came off of it. Now, we'll soon be having a train come by because we are a working museum here, so one of our demonstration passenger trains pulled by historic locomotive Tag 80 will be coming by. We have all different types of trains that you can experience. From the historic Pullman here, there's Tag 80 right there, to the Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia Railway number 80, coaches from the Nancy Hanks. We even have the president of the Baltimore and Ohio's office car here. But critically though, for 30 years, we have been the happy, adoring home of the Clover Colony. That's right, as we move from March into April 2024, that marks 30 years since the restoration of this car. And I shall say, a beam punched through the side right about where we're standing right here. The roof was warped One end of the car to this day is about 3 inches wider than the other end. And at that time, Amtrak became concerned about letting heavyweights, certainly if they had a composite roof with wood and metal on the main line. So we enjoy having the Clover Colony here. We have it on display and in operation at the museum. We take it on some of our longer trips down to Somerville, Georgia and Chickamauga, and run it on our award-winning dinner trains, where it's nice and safe. No buildings to fall in atop it. With Tag 80 having passed by, again, no buildings to topple in atop it, no hurricanes hopefully to hit here this far away from the coast, and we hope for it to have many, many, many more happy memories here, and for it to make many happy memories for you, where you too can experience traveling and sleeping in safety and comfort. There are probably, I will say, about a dozen places where you can experience an intact Pullman. Maybe operating, maybe not. In terms of where you can actually ride in one that's open to the general public, there are only about 3 of these cars still running. We hope very much to change that in the coming years as we bring another car online, but we hope other places will follow through with that as well. So as we turn on the Clover Colony here, thank you very much for putting your headlight on as we put our headlight on the collection. We hope you have very much enjoyed this tour, and we look forward to seeing you in the next tour. And we look forward to seeing you come out here and ride with us. Tickets can be purchased at TVRM.com. We've got a variety of trips throughout the year where this car is operated, and it's been a thorough pleasure to tell you all about this historic vehicle. Donations are naturally always welcome. These days, to maintain one of these cars is very expensive. Anytime we have to replace the carpeting, you're looking at $5,000 to $10,000 right there. New coat of paint. Wouldn't we all love to have all the Pullmans rolling along in Pullman standard color paint? That's probably about 3 times that, at least 2 times that. And like everything out here, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. So it's thanks to you all coming out and riding and donating that all of this is still rolling. And we want to keep it rolling as we enter this car's 5th intended lifespan. It's over 100 years old. I hope that when I'm out here on an oxygen tank and it's turning 200 years old, that it's in a lot better shape than I am. So thank you all very much, and we look forward to seeing you in our next Headlight on the Collection. Goodbye.